Right, that's good. Welcome everyone to the June mid-month bloat, and as is customary, I shall say a few words to call for silence so we can clear our minds of extraneous forces, center ourselves a little. I'll say a few more words, I'll light the candle, and then the proceedings can begin formally. So I should be addressing my words to the north. Diolch bydd ag adlar helga kindir, meri og minni, mögu hendalar. Hel kvöld og hel kveldsinir, hel natt og nift. Óreiðum águm litit alka sínig og gefit sitjóndum sigur. Hel asir, hel ásinir helsja en fólnit og fórud. Málog man vit gefit okka meirund tveim, og likeness henda meddel livum. Brande of brandy bren ons brunin Funny kwekist af funna, maver of manivers at maulikuder, entil dalske of dul. Hail evening and the sons of evening, hail night and her daughter. With unangry eyes, look down upon us and grant to the sitting victory. Hail the gods, hail the goddesses, hail the bountiful earth. Words and wisdom grant us, and healer's hands while we live. Gods of our peoples and lands, may we spend this time together in friendship with you and with each other, and use it to the common good, with profit and with pleasure. Hello, Dean. Welcome everyone to this June mid-month blot, as I think I've already said, and it's a great pleasure to invite Professor Michael York to speak. He's the author of 3 outstanding volumes that cover all aspects of religious experience from a pagan or indigenous point of view, namely pagan theology, pagan ethics, and pagan mysticism, which understands paganism in a sense that reaches to embrace Hinduism. So yeah, without further ado, Michael, shall I go to the slides, or would you like to say a few words first?
All right, I'll say a few words first, and then I'll tell you. I'm just hoping this will not be too technical, and if anybody has any questions or confusions at any point, just interrupt and ask me, and I'll see if we can clarify it. Stead said something about this being the first time. Actually, I gave a earlier version of this talk, at least 20 years ago. And the upshot of that was that I was challenged by Freya Ashwin. She wanted to put a spear through me, but we ended up having a debate, and Steve Wilson was the moderator, and I couldn't get anybody to be my second. I finally asked a friend and told her basically what to say, and she did it very well. And so what we were discussing, what the argument was, I was saying that Óðinn is a negative figure who's usurped the throne of the gods. So the vote came, and the only people who were for my proposal was myself and my second. And so there was quite a number that were against the proposal, but there were more people who abstained. And apparently, this is Steve Wilson, according to Cambridge and Oxford debating rules, if more people abstain, then the proposition is held to still stand. So it was kind of a hollow victory, but that was the upshot of that. I haven't addressed this issue since then. It was enough, but basically, all right, I guess, all right, do the first slide.
Right.
see.
Let's see. Let's see. Let's. Now let's.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Can everybody see this?
yeah. I'll just go to the. Yeah, that's the title, and I'm sorry that I called it the Semmelweis effect, but that's the proper title, the reflex.
Reflex. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, I'm basically focusing on Tor and his Indo-European ancestry. Let's put it that way. And among the Indo-Europeans or the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and then various daughter cultures that derive from that, Romans, Greeks, the Nordics, Vedics, and so forth, there's a general term for deity, and it comes from a root meaning to shine or to be bright. And so we get such names with the Sanskrit Dies Pitar, the Sky Father. In Greek, it's Zeus Pater, and in Latin, it's Jupiter. And from the same word, we get the Sanskrit word for the gods, the Deva or Devas, Latin Deus, and Lithuanian Divas, and English words deity and divinity. So that's the thing that I'm basically centering on, is this understanding of deity as the shining bright ones. And there is another term most prominent among the Vedic Sanskrit peoples, and also through the Avestas, Zoroastrianism. And that is also a term for spirit, but it has more of a connotation of demon, and that's the Ansus, A-N-S-U. And all right, let's see, where are we now?
Next one.
I'll go back and let me just, basically this, you can see the Dies Pater, that would be the Proto-Indo-European term. He's the god of daylight and so forth. And you can see which deities have derived from him, including the Irish, the Dagda, the good god. All right, let's go. Can I do this? Can I? Let me just see what.
Are there any controls?
You have to do it. You have to do it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right. One of the key myths involving this god of brightness and light and this celestial expanse of heavens is the figure having to overcome the dragon, the demon, who wants to dethrone him, liquidate him, and take over the rulership. So it's almost kind of like an inversion. So where are we? That's all right. So this would be, I think this is, I'm not really sure where this comes from. I came across it, but it's basically showing the sky god slaughtering or conquering the dragon. Let's go to the next one instead. And this is a depiction of Dies as the king of the gods. And what happens as you get your daughter languages, now I'm not sure we're there yet. Try the next one. Let's just see if that's, yeah, this is what I want. The figure that we know is Zeus or Jupiter, and actually the Hittite weather god. We don't know his name. We only have an ideogram, and the ideogram refers to him as the weather god. What happens as the daughter languages diverge, very often he splits between being the god of light and the bright sky, and as Zeus and Jupiter are both these things, they're also the god of thunder, lightning, and the storm, the fertilizing storm. But as they progress, you get this Perquinus figure that splits off. And so he develops into the Celtic Tyrannus. In the Germanic, we have Donar and Tor, the Baltic Perquinus, Slavic Perun, and in the Vedic Parjanya, basically that would be Indra. Indra kind of replaces his father Dias and becomes the king of the gods. So let's go on to the next one. So again, this is Zeus fighting Typhon, the dragon, and you get the same image with the Hittite weather god. And let's see, I think we have a couple more. Let's try another one. That's another Zeus fighting Typhon. You get other variants like, and this is Zeus again fighting Typhon. I don't know where I got this, and I couldn't figure out who the artist is. And you have all kinds of variants like Apollo versus Python, and you don't have to go so fast.
Okay,
But you can go on back now on to Indra. Indra fights Ritra, the dragon, and there's a number of figures that he fights. I mean, they're all dragons, basically. I think we have two more of Indra. Let's try seeing it, yeah. And try the next one. Yeah, this is I love this one. This is a Tamil rendering, South India. But again, and what you notice, the key thing always is that Indra and the sky god has the lightning bolt. Here it's called the Vajra, but that's his chief weapon, and that's how he conquers the forces that try to overthrow the gods. Let's see, do we have another one? I think, what's the next one? That's again Indra and the dragon. This one doesn't have his Vajra, but it does show him as the king of the gods. It could be one more. All right, yeah, this is the closest I could get to the weather god. Very often the Hittites use the Hurrian figures. They kind of merge with the Hurrian peoples. And so this is again a depiction of the weather god fighting the dragon. He seems to have an assistant, and very often the hero god does have some assistant helping him. Let's see. All right, let's go on. And then, of course, our classic instance is Thor's opposition to the Midgard serpent. And here is with...
Question now, or should I save it till the end?
I can't hear you.
Can I ask a question now, or should I save it till the end?
No, go ahead and ask now, yeah.
Okay, this is fascinating stuff. I'm just wondering whether this myth is fundamentally different from the Mesopotamian myth of Marduk versus the chaos dragon Tiamat. Isn't
No.
it the same story? Is it the same or different?
I can't hear you very well, but I didn't hear the very last thing you said.
That I'm wondering if it's the same myth or substantially different.
It's not substantially different. The Marduk and the earlier figure, basically Tiamat is a female dragon, and so that's probably one of your main differences. For the Indo-Europeans, the dragon is usually a male dragon, and he wants to be king. So there is a gender factor in there. Okay. So here we have Thor and that famous fishing trip with Hymir, but Hymir panics, and Thor has kind of caught the Midgard serpent, but Hymir in his panic cuts the line, and so the Midgard serpent escapes. Try the next one instead. Yeah, again, I mean, there's lots and lots of pictures and photos and diagrams of Tor and the Midgard serpent. I've only just selected a few, but a lot of them are just fascinating. I just found a whole bunch more today, and I would have included them, but I think we had enough. So let's try the next one. Again, Tor, at least here he's redheaded. And again, he's on the boat. I don't know where Hymir is, but and I think there should be one more. I'm not sure. There could be a couple more. All right. This is it's a Gotland stone. It's from the church in Andre. And again, it shows the Midgard serpent. And I guess that little tiny figure, I don't know if, there's no way I can indicate it, but Tor is this tiny little figure right at the face of the Midgard serpent. But it's an interesting stone. And these were memorial stones to ancestors in a graveyard, which then finally became a church. This is the number 3, and then there's another one. Try the next one instead. And that's number 8. And this, of course, has everybody on it. But if you look all the way to the very, very lower left, that's Tor and Hymir on the boating trip with him spearing the Midgard serpent.
Mm.
And then there's one more of these, this is it's the Hordum stone, and it's from a church in Jutland. So this one's Danish. But again, it shows basically the Midgard serpent. I guess Tor is in there someplace, but do we have any more?
Yeah, well, one can see his foot, I think, coming through the bottom of the boat.
All right, yes, very good.
Oh,
all right, yeah. And this here we have Marduk. Again, he's holding the lightning bolt, and I don't know if that really looks like Tiamat, but it is a dragon, and I think Marduk fights other dragons as well. So where are we? All right. Now, one of the key things in this episode where the hero fights the dragon is that the dragon temporarily wins and defeats the hero god. So in the case of Zeus, Typhon steals Zeus's sinews or tendons and basically paralyzes him. And so he's victorious until either Cadmus or Hermes or Agipan steal those sinews of Zeus's back and restore them to him. And then he's able to go on and reconquer the dragon. The Hittite weather god, he loses to Illuyanka is the dragon that he fights, and Illuyanka gets the weather god's heart and eyes, and he's basically incapacitated and can't fight. His way of getting those things back, it's a very complicated way. The weather god has a son, and he has his Hupashia, and he has his son marry Illuyanka's daughter, and as the bride price, the son asks for his father's heart and eyes, and then the son has to then fight on the side of the dragon, and he tells his father, "It's all right for you to kill me. This is too important." And so the weather god then is ultimately victorious over Illuyanka, the dragon god, and his son has to die in the process. Then we have Indra fighting Ritra, and he's sometimes assisted by Vishnu. In the Rig Veda, Vishnu is like a secondary or a twin to Indra. He's not the major god that he does become in Hinduism. Sometimes the assistant to Indra is called Trita, the third. He has a number of them. Sometimes it's the fire god Agni. But Indra doesn't get so much wounded. Indra gets scared and retreats out of fear because Vritra is quite powerful and frightening and terrifying. And ultimately, he overcomes his fear, and he returns and stands up to Vritra and finally slays him. And so then Indra is restored to the throne, and he resumes his position as king of the gods. We have another instance, and this is among the Celts or the Irish, Nuada. Nuada fights his enemies. I don't think it's necessary. It's Balor, and Balor is this strange figure. Do I have that information?
There is a slide of him.
We can go to Nuada, but I had some other information which I see I didn't include. But yeah, go on to. I don't know where this comes from, but this is apparently Nuada, and it's supposed to be like 3,000 years old, and Nuada holding his severed arm is what I understand it, and because he's impaired, he's not whole, then he has to relinquish his throneship, first of all, to the enemy. Ultimately, I think he's succeeded by Lug or Lugus, who looked of the long-armed. But go on to the next one. He's in the mythology. His severed arm is replaced by a silver arm, so that's why he has this epithet, Ergetlum, meaning silver arm. And once he has that arm, there's another myth in which the healing god has a son who is even a better healer and restores Nuada's living arm. But in any case, once he's been sort of made whole again, then he can regain his throne. So there's always this key thing of the hero god gets impaired, gets maimed in some way, and then finally gets restored, and then ultimately conquers the opponent. So where I'm going, all right, and this, the figure just before this, that's called the Tandragee idol. It was found in a garden in Northern Ireland. So where I want to go with this is I've mentioned that the word for God throughout all these Indo-European daughter languages comes from the word to shine or be bright, but there's another word, and that was the word, it becomes Asura for the Vedics and in Sanskrit, and it becomes Ahura for the Avestans. And in a way, what Zarathustra or Zoroaster has done, for various reasons, he's inverted the whole process. And so the devas, the gods among the Vedics, become devas, which are for the Persians are demons or devils. And the asuras, or what the Persians call ahuras, become the gods. And the supreme god is Ahura Mazda. And so I call it the Persian inversion, but it's something that Zarathustra did. There's all kinds of arguments why that happened, and that gets very complicated, and it's all speculative. But it did happen, and how I got into all this, when I was about 11, my parents moved into a new house, and I was able to find in the attic of the house, almost with one volume missing, a complete set of the Encyclopedia Britannica dating from, what was it, 1889 or something like that. And in those volumes, they talked about this strange split between the Vedics and the Iranians, and how the gods for the Vedics became the devils for the Persians and vice versa. And they said, we don't know how that happened and what it actually means. And that's always been that became one of my life adventures, to try to understand that and search that. And so my Indo-European studies and interest comes out of that, from that Encyclopedia Britannica article. All right, so the likelihood, now again, this is partly speculative. All etymologies are speculative. So one could always counter any argument on that basis. But it seems that our word, the ace or the Aesir, is another cognate to Ahura, Asura. And so what I want to do is to understand who are the Aesir. So let's go to the next one. And this is the thing that got Freya so upset. But I start out, these are basically the 18 possible residents of Asgard. These would be the chief gods of the Norse pantheon. And the trouble is that, of course, I think the gods are basically known as 12, with Odin as the 13th. And so some of these we can automatically eliminate. Balder and Hodor are dead, so they're in hell. They're not in Asgard. And then, of course, Njord and Frey are Vanir. They're not Aesir. They may be living there, but they're not the same. They're a different kind of deity. And then you get the same thing with, like, Heimdall. He's like one of the Vanir. He's the son of the Jotun Aegir's 9 daughters, and according to Davidson, he has Vanir ties. The Loki, of course, is not an ace, so we can kind of take him out. Honir he's another fascinating and confusing one. He is possibly a brother to Odin, but in that triad of Lodur, Odin, and Honir, if Lodur is Loki, he's a Jotun. Odin is the Aesir, and Honir seems to be would be the Vanir, the third grouping. And at least Honir is sent to the Vanir, so he's not in Asgard either. So let's go to the next grouping. So if I've eliminated, who did I eliminate to get to here? I've eliminated, well, we come down to the 13. This is the Snorri's list, except he's replaced Modi and Magni with Loki and Honir. But we've eliminated certain figures, and I think these would be the basic 13 gods of Asgard. But then I want to eliminate the Vanir and eliminate the poetic creations like Vali, Vidar, Magni, and Modi. And so let's go to the next one. And now and the abstraction. So now we're reduced now to Odin, Thor, Tyr, Hermod, and Bragi. Let's see. Bragi is the god of poetry and music, and according to Davidson, again, he was originally an epithet of Odin's. And Hermod also seems to be a, where do I have that? He's also considered to be cognate with Odin. It's Odin going to hell in search of Balder. So your key figures that we're left with, we consolidate Hermod and Bragi with Odin, are these three, Odin, Thor, and Tyr. Now, the generic name for deity among the Norse are the Tivar, and Tyr is the chief personification. It would be the same as the Devas being the generic, and Deus or Dias being the personification, the king of the gods. And the same with, in Latin at least, we have the Deus, Dei, and the Jupiter. Again, they're all cognate words. So my argument is that Tyr is not really an ace. He's the penultimate or the ultimate Tivar, the ultimate deity. And again, as we've seen in some of the other figures, ultimately that figure, that celestial figure, splits into the god of light and the god of thunder. And so, in a sense, Tyr and Thor are also not Aesir. So let's go to the last one. Do I have another one? No. Yeah, so then we get, this is our basic, what's left if we've eliminated all the others. And that elimination is something that anyone can argue, but that's my basic argument. And so the ultimate ace is Odin. He represents collectively the Aesir. All the others have somehow been infiltrated or brought in, but let's go now to, no, I don't think you have to change it yet. Well, all right, yes, let's look at Tyr. Let's do the first one. What we see with the Tyr legend is that he's been maimed. He's lost his arm, and consequently he's somehow, I mean, all these myths become reworked, and that's why they're so fascinating, is because they take various elements, but depending on the times and the purposes and so forth, they become modified and they become something different and unique from the rest of the groupings and for what they descend from. But he's no longer qualified to be the king. He's actually been dethroned by the opponent, by the Asura, Ahura, or the Ace. I think the one figure I didn't mention was Ul or Uller, and again, he has more ties with the Vanir, so I actually excluded him too. And his place names are always with place names of Vanir. So that's why I did overlook him. So you have a whole series of myths in which the enemy or the dragon type figure is one-eyed. You have that with Homer, and with Odysseus and the Cyclops Polyphemus. In Irish mythology, you have Balor, a giant, who has just one eye in his forehead that would wreak destruction when he opened it. There's several, I mean, you have another figure among the Scythians, Arimaspi, you have a Hagen or a Hogni, a Burgundian warrior in German and Norse legend. You have a Serbian one-eyed dog-headed monster. Several figures in Hindu mythology. One, Kabanda, is a demon with no head or neck and one large eye on the breast and a mouth on the stomach. We even have a one-eyed ogre in a Turkish epic. And so ultimately what I'm saying is that Óðinn represents this one-eyed antithetical figure, and somehow the restoration part of the myth got interrupted among the Germanic and Nordic peoples. And God Týr does not regain the throne as he does in the other versions of the myths among other peoples. So I know I'm painting a rather negative position of Óðinn, and that's not my intention. I kissed the figure of Óðinn in that you find in the upper level of one of the rune churches in Norway. But doing all this research and finally uncovering what seems to be the story to me, I really honored Týr, and so it's not my wish to offend anybody, but I mean I'm just presenting you evidence. There was a time when I was in college and I had to withdraw midterm, and a group of us went out in a car and were drinking beer. And I had a good friend. He had been a very staunch Roman Catholic. And the trouble is, when we were having this drinking session, I had laryngitis and I couldn't talk. And my friend started explaining how, because of my influence and what I had said to him, how he had lost his Roman Catholic faith. And I felt terrible about that. I couldn't say anything, and I couldn't try to help him at that point. But I thought, what have I done? Why did I take that away from him? And what have I given him in his place? I mean, he survived and went on, and we were always good friends for years and years afterwards. But my background is sociology and religious studies, and it's always a controversial area, is that you respect people's religion, you allow them their beliefs. I don't particularly like Christianity, but I think it's important not to try to denigrate other people's belief. At the same time, though, as a researcher and an academic scholar, I think you have to also not shy away from how the story unfolds and the evidence that you encounter. I recently read a very interesting article by Joshua, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, R-O-O-D, I would say Rude. And it's called Ascending the Steps to Hlithskjalf, the Cult of Óðinn in Early Scandinavian Aristocracy. And Joshua's argument is that Óðinn seems to have been a god of a particular milieu from an early point from the migration and Vendel areas. He doesn't go back further than that. And what he says, as that milieu seized ever more power, and as their kingdoms expanded and they began to develop towards statehood, it seems that Óðinn was made a transition from being a symbol of social identity into one that legitimized their sovereign power. As his worshippers increasingly institutionalized their authority, and this is kind of like the warrior bands or elite, and as they ruled over larger expanses of territory, Óðinn seems to have begun to develop into a transnational gods. So in other words, the figure of Óðinn appears to have been created by a people, class, or social group who had ideological and cultural connections to the aristocratic worlds of Rome and the Merovingians, a group that seems to have desired to create and maintain their own identity and underline their differences from the local populations over whom they ruled. What this means is that for the worship of Óðinn, the evidence for the development of a new warrior aristocracy seems to have coincided with an apparent new social stratification within Southern Scandinavian society. And this occurred primarily between the 5th and 7th centuries. It may have continued from some earlier developments in the Roman Iron Age. And basically, this coincided with Scandinavian society developing from decentralized tribes into larger kingdoms. So there's a certain purpose in this growing preeminence of Odin that re-support or does support this new emerging aristocracy. The New Milu seems to have formed part of a greater network of aristocracy which encompassed parts of England and the continent, and which included local pagan people like the Suebians, the fledgling Christian kingdoms, such as those known among the Merovingians. This newly emergent milieu in Scandinavia centered around warrior rulers, their families, and their chosen retinues of skilled warriors. And consequently, the authority seems to have begun to shift away from other social spheres, away from the thing, and away from the earlier communal natural worship sites to take new shape under the control of the ruler himself, something that meant that the authority of the new ruler would have become increasingly institutionalized. Within this newly emerging milieu, the figure of Odin appears to have come into prominence, developed, and eventually became codified. The large central hall, which we might say formed the ideological and cosmic centerpiece of the Vendel and Viking Age rulers, was something that in many ways developed from the Roman basilica. And so here's a key point, is taking up the Christian god worshipped by the Romans and the Merovingians might have been too much of a leap and incompatible with the beliefs of the locals on whom the new Scandinavian rulers based their livelihood. Such a move would also have thrust these rulers within the political arena of Christian Europe, ruled by the Church of Rome, resulting in a potential loss of autonomy. So the natural alternative was to allow a god to develop within their own halls who was free enough from the widespread local tradition for him to be adapted to their own emerging ideology, but also contextually compatible with the local social and ideological and cosmic framework. We may even be dealing with a god that had earlier been adopted by the Germanic tribal war bands that had wandered into the south at the time of the fall of Rome. So the direct evidence of Odin indicates a south to north trajectory. While a conceptual figure may be named Odin or one of the linguistic cognates in a certain place or time, this is earlier, that figure might be hardly recognizable as the Odin we meet later in Snorri's works or in the Eddic poetry. Various features now associated with the figure may well have existed as independent concepts at earlier points, being associated elsewhere with other deities, rulers, or folk heroes. They might have arisen from within the realm of law out of superstition or as a social ideal long before they ultimately were compounded into a figure named Odin. We often forget that the image given by Snorri and or the Eddic poems is actually a tapestry made up of numerous nebulous and multifaceted threads, some of which were many hundreds of years old before they were written down, while others are probably much younger. And so, for example, while Odin's connection to war might be very old and widespread, his role as god of poetry might be something that developed more recently and in Western Scandinavia. So these rising new rulers appeared to have role-played Odin in various contexts. The gods that the warriors brought with them would come to be perceived likewise as being beneath the mighty sovereign father god Odin. And in addition, some of the attributes of local gods would eventually become his, their cosmic lineages and roles shifting toward one in which Odin is the All-Father, whom they serve as their warriors do the sovereign king. According to Eddic poetry, this was a god who sacrificed himself to himself and gave one of his eyes for knowledge. It is uncertain how old his connection with ravens, eagles, and wolves, which is stressed in later works, actually is. The Vendel and Viking Age images of a man dressed in wolfskins advancing alongside a dancer with spears or swords and wearing a helmet with bird head terminals contain most of these elements, but they seem to be contextually different. With the iconographic Odinic figures from the Vendel period, sometimes have one eye, but this is not always the case. And so like the concepts of information gathering ravens and pet wolves, this concept might have been still developing as an Odinic feature. Odin's association with alcohol is nonetheless possibly older in that it seems evident that drinking rituals were important to the elite milieu that worshipped him. The point at which Odin took on the role of cosmic father figure is, of course, uncertain and can be based on little more than logical conjecture. But the dynamic god of the Vendel area, who was strongly associated with a male warrior elite, seems to have become more mainstream during the Viking Age. As Odin became rooted in tradition and cultural memory, becoming ever more widely known, it is probable that he moved into new contexts, including those related with the magical world of Sether and foreknowledge previously associated more with the realm of women. But again, this is an appropriation. As Gunnel has pointed out, it was not unusual that Odin and or his wife seems to have often taken over objects and spaces that originally belonged to other gods. Indeed, there is a good reason to assume that some of his many names might have belonged originally to other gods. And that's been my feeling, and you can make a case. I'm still working on that, but I think you can make a case where some of the epithets do, especially the ones that include the word Tivar or in them, or Tyr, would seem to not have been originally Odin's. So the Odin of the 6th and 7th century might have come to develop into the old one-eyed wandering god of later times, associated in particular with magic, arcane knowledge, and poetry, as the worship of Odin spread westward into Norway, and particularly north into the Trøndelag region during the early Viking Age. Consequently, Odin became prominent because he increasingly became part of the way in which the migration and Vendel area aristocrats constructed and demonstrated their own identity. Certainly, Odin had societal and cosmic roles such as war from an early point, and it may be that various aspects of the earliest form of Odin are what gave him an early edge over any number of other deities. However, and this is again Joshua's argument, there is reason to believe that his primary role and his importance from an early point was related to helping to create and maintain the identity and ideals of a new Scandinavian aristocracy. And this theory then is at odds with any notion of a pantheon, or the idea that the gods each had a specific cosmic role within a given society. The Skalds, who Joshua identifies essentially the media of the time, and the closest thing that an oral society had to a source of doctrine, simultaneously called Odin the ruler of the gods, thereby raising him above all other gods, just as the ruler wished to be seen as being greater than other rulers. To the paradigm of world religions versus communal religions, Odin as a deity does not fit well into either category. He appears to be a hybrid, something in between a centralized doctrinal transnational god and a syncretic, adaptable, community-based figure. In a sense, and this is an important point, he becomes a stepping stone on the way to the eventual acceptance of Christianity during the second half of the first millennium. And that's always been my argument, that with the victory of the negative dragon affiliated figure and the removal of the Sky Lord from the throne, it's the same process as that Abrahamic God overtaking the earlier understanding. So let's see, where am I now? All right, I have.
Michael, sorry, could you say that again? I wasn't quite sure what you were saying about the Abrahamic deity. Take it. So I didn't quite follow.
All right, so I see Odin as a stepping stone figure to the Abrahamic, for the Abrahamic God to finally take full control over the Germanic speaking peoples and the Nordics in Scandinavia. By already having, by severing the completion of the myth, it's already, we've already dethroned the legitimate figure. And so it's an understandable process then for the Scandinavians to accept Christianity, because they've already lost their legitimate ruler.
Why would they continue to be devotees of Odin rather than Jesus?
Why would they continue to be?
Well, why would they not?
Because, well, all right. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why Christianity succeeded.
I shouldn't really.
And so I'm saying, if we look at the underlying mythic developments, you see a line of the loss of the original understanding, the inversion of that understanding, kind of like what Zoroaster did in Persia, and then it continues on to just, all right, let's just make it Christ and the Abrahamic God, and the other figures become either demons or false gods or whatever you want to call them. So I just have two things. One of these things, I can't remember where I got it, but just curiously looking at Jung, he actually saw the archetype of Wotan as a destructive archetype to the collective psychology of the Germans in the 1930s. He understood the expression of the Wotan archetype as the destructive force that underpinned both world wars and the 20th century totalitarians more generally. And from his Red Book, he says, nothing is more valuable to the evil one than his eye, since only through his eye can emptiness seize gleaming fullness. Emptiness drinks fullness and its shining power in by means of its eye. The emptiness is poor, and if it lacked its eye, it would be hopeless. It sees the most beautiful and wants to devour it in order to spoil it. And so he emphasized the predominant masculine element of Wotan in the recurrent image of the wind. But it's whether you want to argue against Jung, that's fine. But he saw that, and basically Davidson, she comes out and she says that Odin was a demon that comes in late to Germanic and Nordic mythology. So, all right, perhaps then it should come as no surprise that Odin, the patron god of such elite warriors, has a giant for a mother and is therefore half giant himself. Despite being the chief of the Aesir, Odin has several extremely... What was that?
Mick, did you, I think you were probably talking to your mother, weren't you?
Oh, sorry, mate. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, perhaps mute yourself if you would.
Sorry, I thought I was muted, mate. Sorry.
Sorry, Michael.
So we all can do that. So despite being the chief of the Aesir, Odin has several extremely Uttengard characteristics, including tendencies towards adopting female gender roles in certain situations, a fondness for seeking out the giants to acquire the immense wisdom they possess, a reputation for being a capricious and disloyal trickster, and at times more concerned for his own personal development and power than the well-being of those close to him. Sounds kind of like an American president, but these traits, of course, did not stop the heathen Germanic peoples from worshiping him fervently, and for people of a certain temperament, even emulating him. So I think that's basically what I have to say. How are we doing time-wise? I guess we're all right.
Oh, we're fine. Do you want to talk us through the remaining slides? I think there may be a couple more.
Oh, all right. Yes, I forgot we had. All right, so here we have Týr. I have several of Týr.
I'll go to the next one.
And again, oops. Well, I guess it's there. I can't see Týr, but
Oh, he's got his hand in the wolf's mouth.
yes, yeah, I have the photos blocking it out.
Oh, what? No.
I think is there one more?
There is. There's a rather scary one. Everyone,
Yes.
brace yourselves. Brace yourselves. No, it wasn't that. Sorry.
All right, we got these two.
Yeah.
That one. Although I guess there's, I mean, there's a lot of them. Again, like the Tor thing, there's lots of these, but
yeah.
And
yeah, let's see. All right, so go to the next one. Yeah,
yep.
All right. What's that? Oh, that's it. Yeah.
And then that one.
Yeah, that's very, very disturbing. Yeah.
I thought I had some information on it, but I can't find it now.
Sorry to interrupt. Earlier, I just saw a black horned statue kneeling. I was just wondering if you had a source for where that was from.
This one. No, I can't remember. I just took it off the internet.
Okay.
But I think
it's okay. I have ways of trying to find it. Don't worry.
Yeah, it shows up fairly readily. But
what's the story with this, Michael? I mean, it looks as if you were visiting a sculptor in his studio and took a photograph.
Yeah, I mean, I got this again from the internet, but it's and of course it's a modern depiction, but it does capture the emotion of the moment, and when you have the hero god being maimed and impaired by the monster, I mean, he's not going to just. It's going to be quite a shock. It's not going to be something he's going to just accept serenely, at least at the moment it happens. And this conveys that. So it's a very powerful image. I think that's the last one.
It is the last slide. It is the last slide, Michael. Thank you very much for that quite provocative and richly illustrated talk. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm sure people will like to ask a few questions. So I'll go back to the.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Excellent. Yeah, would anyone like to? Does anyone have a question that they're keen to put to Michael? If no one does, then I will, and everyone can be perhaps collecting his or her thoughts.
I can wait to the end of the presentation.
Yeah. All right,
I have one more thing I could just go in. And this is the post-Ragnarok situation, which to me is fascinating. And the figures that you have Surtur, the god of fire. Honir seems to survive. And both Vidar and Vali, Vidar the Fenrir destroyer and Vali the wolf, survive. Balder and Hoder return from hell, and Sol's daughter. And the one mystery is Njord. He apparently returns to Vanaheim at the time of Ragnarok, but you don't hear about his ending. And then, of course, you have Leif and Leifrasir being the human couple. So you have kind of a new pantheon that emerges after the destruction of the whole shebang. I think if Hoder is really an instance of Odin, the difference is that you now have a fully blind negative figure rather than the one-eyed figure. So I think it's, in a way, it could be interpreted at least as a more positive development. And the one question that I have is, I mean, do the Norns themselves survive Ragnarok? We don't hear
Mm.
anything on that. But
Mm.
all right. So what did you want to bring up?
Oh, I
Stan?
think AJ, you had your hand up. Would you like to ask a
I
question?
have a comment, yes. I just thought that was brilliant. I just wanted to say that. And it's very consistent. The reason I brought up that other question is that similar treatments have been written. I don't know if you know the work of Robert Wright. He wrote The Evolution of God, right? And he told a
Yes.
similar story about the consolidation of Marduk's power among the Semitic peoples of Mesopotamia. And it almost paralleled exactly what you were
Yeah.
saying about Odin
Yeah.
in the Germanic lands, you know? And I thought that was a really interesting parallelism, which is what struck me from the minute you started talking. And I don't know whether you've read Robert Wright's work, but if you haven't, I would strongly recommend it. He made it a reflection of state formation, you know, as
Of
an
reflection of what?
state formation of the
State
consolidation,
formation. All right. Yeah.
right? That you also got the consolidation of divine power under kind of a supreme leader who came to usurp all the
Yeah.
other gods. And
Right.
I completely agree with you, and so does Robert Wright, that this is a step that is a prelude to monotheism. Hold on, I'm going to mute myself and answer the.
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
I didn't know if it was mine or not.
would anyone else like to put any questions? Oh well, I'll ask.
I was just wondering, actually, I was just wondering how this relates to St. George and St. Michael. And they obviously have a common root.
Especially
Could you
St.
just
George.
clarify that?
Yeah, especially St. George. George, I mean, we get his name derives from earth worker, and the Georgos was an epithet of Zeus in Greek. He's the earth worker. Ultimately, is the farmer. He's the one who works the earth and produces the crops that come from the farmer's work. And so the dragon is the sterile earth. And often in the imageries, you have the captive maiden who would be the fertile earth, which is being rescued by the dragon slayer, Zeus Georgios, who becomes St. George. And interestingly, the festival of St. George, I think is it the 23rd of April?
Yeah.
Yeah, is in the old Roman calendar is a festival of Jupiter. So there's a very direct continuity. St. Michael, I think I can't really go in. I don't know where he comes, but he's kind of parallel St. George, but becomes an angel and even gets further away from the idea of pagan deities being behind him.
Michael, many people have drawn attention to the profound similarity between manifestations of Lord Shiv and Lord Óðinn, the asceticism of both, self immolation on the tree, the death by hanging, and also with the spear, and the fasting, also the great attributes of mental power, being very much gods of meditation and the mind, and this sort of combination of qualities that might be normally associated with sort of both genders, really, that seem to be united in one being who goes beyond gender distinctions. It's really a grand kind of sense of deity that one finds in Shiva, also the rage as well. That's many of Odin's names are related to passion and fury, and that is also a quality of Shiva. The fact of Ganesh having an elephant head is because he cut off the head of his own son in anger and then replaced it. So there's a lot of similarities there, very similar figures, and this is quite a theme. One can find many people that have written about that. Do you have any observations on that?
Well, Shiva, I mean, he's a fascinating figure. What you have in the transformation of Vedic religion into Brahmanic Hinduism, you have the development of what I would call the super gods, and they're basic. There might be Devi, Kali, Durga as a female figure, but basically it's Vishnu, who was an acolyte, kind of an assistant to Indra, and Shiva, and they, unlike the earlier Vedic gods, who really have associations and links and exist kind of as personifications of aspects of nature, these super gods become something different. I think of Yahweh, the Abrahamic God, as one of these super gods, maybe Fortuna. There's a few others. But Shiva himself, I mean, the idea of linking him with Odin is, to me, is a little surprising.
Have you not heard that from other authors? It seems quite a
not
widespread.
Necessarily. He was, I mean, if anything, Shiva, by the the descendants of Alexander the Great in Afghanistan or wherever, identified Shiva with Dionysus. And I think there's much more of a link there. Dionysus can be quite wild, as Shiva can. Dionysus can lose control, as Shiva can. But Dionysus, literally the Zeus of Nisa, which might have been the capital of the Hittites, Nessa. But Dionysus also is slain and goes to the underworld, and ultimately then is revived. Either he's brought back, or he at least is reborn through the thigh of Zeus. So he's a younger version of Zeus, and he's restored like Zeus. But Shiva himself, if Shiva has Vedic sources, it's probably the fire god Agni, and Rudra, who is a storm angry god, but he's very definitely a deva. He's not an asura. He's not an ahura. So I don't see a real link between Shiva and Odin, except that you can always argue that Odin, as he developed as a figure, absorbed characteristics and traits from other deities. And so the ultimate composite figure that we have of Odin contains a lot of elements of other deities. And in a way, maybe Shiva has done that also in the India context. But
did anyone else have a question, or should I continue?
I have a question. I want to say that obviously that was a really fascinating presentation. It was well argued, and in the broad strokes, it certainly is a powerful argument. Obviously, this story, it starts from the idea of trying to reconstruct a proto-Indo-European myth. And with regards to what we already have, there is just a frustrating lack of sources. And so what we try and do is we say, well, we have these different branches of the Indo-European faiths, and we can draw comparisons and say, well, the Norse pantheon of the Norse story is different in various significant ways. Now, one of the themes that you brought up during your talk was the idea of religion changing or as a result of circumstances and conditions, political power, so on. And so I want to throw out the sort of three contrarian arguments and to see if there's anything that you wanted to comment on. So firstly is that perhaps conditions, is it not possible for conditions to bring out deeper truths or original truths or past truths that have been lost to those who no longer needed them? Is it possible that given sort of Norse, the Germanic cultures and peoples, in contrast to other Indo-Europeans, were considerably not only non-urbanized, but had lived in considerably less agrarian societies with an existence not too unlike though the conditions of the early Indo-Europeans. So I was wondering if you had, and just also one more thing is, the first thing that came to mind is there have been similar constructions and movements, usurpations, if you want to put it in this way, that have occurred in other Indo-European religions. The Roman pantheon is the first thing that came to mind. Do you have comments on any of these questions?
All right. What do you mean about the Roman pantheon?
Well, in terms of the political history of Rome, the entering of Sol Invictus as a political device and as a prominent part of Roman religious society, and as one of the arguments you mentioned was as a stepping stone to, as Odin being a stepping stone to Abrahamism. Sol Invictus certainly, I think, was perhaps intentionally created as a role for that.
I think it worked out that way. I think that wasn't the intention. I forget now who, which emperor was it that, I can't remember his name now, that instituted the Sol Invictus. But, and of course that's a relatively late thing, but of course when that occurred, Christianity was already gaining great strength. And there's an argument why Christianity was as successful in Rome. This is Rodney Stark. He's a sociologist, very colorful, controversial figure, but quite astute and brilliant in many ways. And his argument ultimately was that because the church, first of all, was opposed to abortion, and secondly, it was customary in the day to, if a child was unwanted, to expose the child. And of course, the Christians would always be scooping up these abandoned children. And because of that, Christianity gained its first appeal among women, because women survived by not having abortions. And then also women had these other children that were then found. And of course, they then passed their Christianity on to their children. So his argument is that it was basically a female sociological development that's behind the success of Christianity. So when Sol Invictus was elevated, that's already at the time that Christianity is making great advances. And it seems like it was almost like Julian the Apostate making a desperate last attempt to try to stop this avalanche. That's would be my understanding of that. You mentioned.
So if you want me to rephrase the earlier question, so I was discussing the disparity between Indo-European religions, how the Nordic pantheon stands out, and whether it's not necessarily the Nordic pantheon which is diverged from what we theorize as a root native faith, but perhaps it's these other native faiths that exist sort of from Mediterranean to India and Iran. These were enormous farming civilizations, urban, cosmopolitan, agrarian, and had far more advanced and different structures that would have required a different management of ethics and spirituality.
Well,
just a front. Maybe that's just a contrarian argument, but I just.
I mean, those have to be factors, yes. I mean, if you go back, if you really lean at Proto-Indo-European, I mean, the deities are very closely integrated with nature. And there also seems to be a strong tie with agriculture and the need of fertility, the rains that fertilize the earth, the fertility of the earth, and so forth. And it's when you start developing into later figures and these super gods, and especially then with Zoroaster's reversal of everything, you develop these more ethical figures. They're not the elementary earliest figures. The earliest ones are really very closely aligned with nature itself without necessarily interpreting that. I mean, nature doesn't have morality in itself. Nature is just nature. It's just the real and automatic. But as civilizations develop, and especially, I suppose, as they become more urbanized, then you start developing codes of behavior, codes of control, and the whole shebang of ethics and morality. So, yes, that's a factor. I think if you look at the widespread distribution, especially of both the earth figure and the personification of light and brightness, and the fact that that cognate term is the most widespread term for deity itself among all these different split-offs from the Proto-Indo-European. So all your Indo-European daughter cultures. You're seeing something much more closely aligned to nature and something more ubiquitous. So when you have a different development, as you do in Persia, there are other factors that are now causing that new development. And either the inversion or the variation or whatever you want to call it. And again, going back to Rude's arguments, he sees the earlier figures as the older figures, and the old Óðinn figure coming in with this development of an aristocracy and kind of the change of the social organization. And so I would say that's really a later development. He would say that, and that's basically my feeling too.
No, I'm sorry, I don't want to keep going on forever. I think that was excellent, and certainly with regards to Týr, people have talked and theorized a lot about his relationship to the pantheon. He was a more central figure. But in terms of source material, it's so difficult. Is there any recommended reading that you might prescribe for anyone to might elaborate on some of these theories?
My own book, which I mean, it's a tome, and it's called The Divine versus the Assyrian, an Indo-European interpretation of. Or an interpretation of Indo-European cult and myth. And I forget now who does that now, Roman and Littlefield. But, and that's where it's my magnum opus. So, but that's where I do the arguments. I'm looking at all the individual cultures and mythologies and drawing out of them the elements that do seem to compare with the other daughter cultures, and then what stories, what underlying narratives one can develop out of that. And ultimately, of course, it is speculation. You can't think with history is you never can prove it to begin with. With a science like archaeology, you can come up with the findings, and those are concrete, but then again, you still have to interpret them. And so...
but with religious views about a religion which is actually in the process of being sort of practice, there is some sense that if one lives on the basis of that particular view, that will give some information as to whether it bears fruit. Maybe that's another.
I mean, I think doesn't everything bear fruit of some sort? I mean, Christianity can do a lot of negative things, but I think for a lot of people, it's a positive orientation, and it bears fruit for them individually and in their lives, and that's one of the functions of religion per se.
Yeah. AJ, did you have I saw you had your hand up, please.
Yes, I just didn't want to interrupt. I'm finding this all really fascinating. So two things. One, Emperor Elagabalus introduced the worship of
Oh, right.
in the 3rd century. And my other point is a question. Okay, I'm fascinated by your idea of aristocratic and state consolidation. Now, you place it during the Merovingian period, which makes sense. But I'm just wondering whether the subsequent invasions by Charlemagne, right, into places like Saxony and the forced conversions of pagans, etc., created greater pressure. Do you know if there was an acceleration of this process during the Carolingian era?
That's not my area. I'm not familiar, but I certainly would suspect as much. I mean, you see
pressure on these guys from state.
Pardon me?
Because that put greater pressure on these guys from state societies.
Without a doubt. I mean, I think you're hitting on something that's should be explored. I'm sure someone has, but there was this whole momentum, and why so many leaders converted to Christianity. I mean, to me, that's mystifying, but they must have perceived certain advantages. Who knows whether the church, which seemed to be ever growing more powerful, offered them certain assistances and that they could not refuse. But it's a whole study. An earlier thing, Robert Lane Fox's, what is it called, Pagans and Christians, or Christians and Pagans?
That's a brilliant book. I love it.
It is a brilliant book. And basically he's describing how they were basically each holding their own for a great period of time. It wasn't just a total wipeout of paganism by Christianity. The pagans were strong, but Christianity has the advantage, and I used to tell this to my students when I was teaching, it can hold its own when things are neutral. But if things go bad, like a plague, like a war, or whatnot, Christianity can capitalize on that. It becomes, you need God to help you through this, or you're being punished because of sin. And so Christianity, I think, has always made great gains under human suffering, especially peak times of human suffering. And if people aren't suffering, then it can just sort of hold its own and wait until the next disaster and then play its cards. And I think that's why it has succeeded so well.
Sorry, can I ask something? Sorry, Stead.
No, you go ahead, please.
Okay.
Please.
Now that we're talking about Christianity, I recently just read a sort of a short version of the Emerald Tablets. And in there, they talk about the three major energies, the energy of power, the energies of wisdom, and the energy of, I think, light. And it came back to three again. You know, very often we've got the three, and in Christianity also the Trinity. Now, when you had the list up with all the gods, you redacted that and reduced that to really three names, Óðinn, Thor, and Týr. Is there a connection there?
that triadic thing is ubiquitous, and it's probably because I mean it's a natural. It's easy to grasp. There's a kind of an innate balance in it. I mean, you have past, present, and future. I mean, everything can be brought down to some kind of a triad. And especially in Europe, you have all these triplicate mother goddess triads. They're ubiquitous. So I think my understanding is that there's an innate, I mean, you could go into Hegel and see the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It might be something like that as well. But I think the dynamic is even wider. And I also think it's something that just has a natural, easy appeal. It's not complicated. Pantheons, I mean, when you get a pantheon of 12 figures, they're fascinating. It gives room for everybody. But it also can be too complex for a lot of people. I think the original understanding would be 5 figures. If we look back at the Indo-European origin of the word 5, it's the same word for the hand. It's the 5 figures of the hand. And that was the understanding of totality. So your original gods would probably be sun, moon, the bright sky, the dawn, and the earth. And then you develop this idea of the divine twins, which kind of are already inherent among those 5, but then become something additional. And so you end up with a proto-pantheon, at least for the Indo-Europeans. I call it a heptatheon, but it's basically 7 figures. It's the basic 5, and then the 2 twins that are added to it. The triad is within the pentad, but it's there's a whole variation, and there's kind of a possibility and appeal for everybody at some point. Some people like the whole full pantheon. You get into India, they have hundreds and hundreds of deities. So that's the thing I love about paganism. There's no real restriction. You can have whatever appeals and works for you or your group or your family or your community.
Thank
Michael, I remember I think when we had a bloke to Týr, you made some remarks. Is he one of your principal sort of personal deities?
Oh, without a doubt. Yes. Yes.
So you kind of consider him like the sort of root of divinity that kind of connects back with.
Oh yes, and I love the fact that he's the god of honor, which to me is at the heart of everything. So I mean, I have lots of gods, but it would be Týr would be my favorite. Týr and Freyr, and then among the Vedic peoples it would be Indra and Agni, but definitely Týr.
And do you connect him? Do you see him as a manifestation of any of the Vedic deities, or?
Yeah, he's comparable to Indra, and he's cognate with Indra's father Dias. So yes, he loses his hand, whereas Indra loses his courage. But Indra then regains his courage. That's the completion of the myth, whereas I don't think it completes in the version we get through Snorri.
So you see Lord Týr as being the representative in the northern pantheon of Indra rather than Thor, which perhaps most people would.
I don't think you can divide them. I mean, I think Týr might be older, but Thor is is so close a development. When you look at the Hittite weather god and the Greeks and the Romans, the thunder and the bright sky are one figure. But among the other cultures, they fissured and divided into two figures, but they still come from the same ultimate source. And so I think the figure that I probably respond to the most would be Jupiter or Zeus, because I see him as the personification of what all the gods have in common, and that's basically light or brightness.
Thank you. Adam or Mick or Maria, any questions? Or Robert, are you still there, Robert? Somewhere? No, maybe you've gone.
Hi there. Hi there. Yeah. Can I just say I've got to disappear because it's Karina's birthday as from midnight. So ready, but I would like to say that was a very thought-provoking and lecture, and I really enjoyed that. I like having things pushed out of my comfort zone sometimes, which makes me first think, what? Then, yeah, maybe I should think some more on that. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
well, thank you for that.
Yeah, give Karina, my best wishes for tomorrow. Yeah, that's good. No, thanks for having you with us, Adam. Appreciate it. That's good.
Okay. And if any of you will be on the event on Saturday, I'm sure we'll be getting in contact via social media.
Keep safe. Good to see you. Bye bye. Now, yeah. Robert, do you have any questions, or any of the other people here who've not raised any points? But by the way, what was Joshua Rood's sort of positive sort of position? Was Swami Narayan said never take religious instruction from an atheist. I just wondered, what was he of that disposition?
I don't know him personally, but he's heathen. That's all I really know.
Right.
And he's an academic, so like some of us.
Because I've understood what you said in relation to your veneration for Týr, and I think that that's an important element, I think, in what you said. Whereas if someone isn't speaking in favour of a deity, but maybe is trying to deconstruct another one, then it maybe is less wholesome, maybe. But the book sounds interesting, certainly. Yeah, the book sounds good. Do we have any? Maybe there's a question in chat. Oh, okay. No.
Yeah, what is that chat with the number 5? What does that mean? Down at the bottom.
That means that people can send messages either to everyone or to individuals. If they, tuck your shirt in or something, if in a person, it's quite useful. It's quite a useful thing.
So what do you click on it and then you get the messages?
Yeah, then you can select the person that you wish to send a message to, or you can send it to everyone. So it's quite a useful facility.
All right. I mean, it's basically you to everyone, Dirk to everyone, you again to everyone, Peter to everyone.
Yeah.
And Moira to everyone.
However, I mean, there's looking at the if you sort of click that, then you can go down and then send them an individual message, maybe, if so it's quite a useful facility. That's good. Yeah, I'm just thinking whether I've got any.
I love AJ's background. I mean, that just. I figure that's why I can't hear you, because I think of you actually being there. But it's gorgeous. So
I'm doing self-isolation.
I think most of us are.
Does anyone else have any further questions or comments? In which case we maybe can bring the evening to an end.
Nothing more. Excellent talk. Thank you.
Yeah, it was very nutritious, and it was it took us outside of our comfort zone, I think. But I think with paganism, because paganism is not about doctrine or dogma, it's about practice and what's in one's heart. In kind of Hindu terms, it's about dharma and bhakti. So the actual theoretical status of things is not, that takes care of itself. One just has to live properly and have the right thing in one's heart, and everything else takes care of itself, I think.
I agree with that.
Thank you. Right, I shall say a few words to close the meeting and blow out the candle. Amotugir amiskun Semmelweis at kveldis galdog loefa kono ebrende maki runde mooi egevine ise ivekemmer drukket or at not skal kveld loefa. Blessed gods of our peoples and lands, at evening shall one praise the day, and at nights shall one praise the evening. We offer thanks for what we've profited by and for what we have taken pleasure in. Sigur either, sigur os, sigur os. Either, os. Unvanto vishwan arium, gura gufka verildinasculum. Let us make the world noble. Elodie. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking time to join us today, and Michael for selecting such a wide and interesting range of slides and taking us through them, and revisiting a topic that you broached a few years ago. But no, that was most beneficial, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people wanting to see it. You off, AJ, lovely to see you. Thanks very much. Unless anyone
pasted on the chat box, you can download a book review that I wrote on the book that I recommended to Michael, which is The Evolution of God. I wrote a book review way back in 2010.
Oh, excellent. Let's do that. I think I'll I'm gonna download that. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think copy. Good. Well, I've done that. That's great. Now I will say good night, everyone, and keep safe, and see you later. The bloat will be on the 21st of June at noon for those who can. But AJ, that will be a bit too early in the morning, I think. But anyway, see you everyone later. Bye bye.
Yeah, cheers, Michael.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.